Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of May, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson. Myself, Brian Gerrish. Well, excuse me, we'll start off with a big thank you because a lot of UK Column viewers and listeners sent in emails alerting us to this story. It's the Independent. Well, that was the one that was chosen. Queen Elizabeth said the future of Britain was in Europe. This is according to declassified German diplomatic records, and several papers now running this story. And what an amazing little story it is. Essentially, it's around a diplomatic cable written by Ambassador Rudiger von Wechmar after a meeting with the monarch in 1988. And he said that the Queen left no doubt that the future of Britain lies in Europe. The ambassador spoke with Elizabeth II for a farewell meeting at the German embassy in London and relayed his conversation back to the government. Now, on the internet, you can find some excerpts of the what would they call diplomatic dispatches. You need to search for those. This is the gentleman concerned. Here he is, Mr. Wechmar. He said the Queen made a joke about the coming of the single market in 1992, which had been agreed in the 1986 Single European Act, which had been approved by the UK. The British were, she said with a chuckle, still highly insular people, and most of them could not make very much of the magic number 1992. So this is very, very interesting language indeed. I've got to say to our audience today that if this is true, I personally find this very offensive, as I had the pleasure of meeting the Queen on board a naval warship many years ago. I asked her whether she was happy to be at that particular event, and she said to me that she was thoroughly enjoying herself as it was so good to be amongst friends. So I have to say, live on air today, Mike, I wonder whether that very same Queen was saying that to my face while she was betraying me behind my back. But there is more. The gentleman went on. I told the Queen I sometimes couldn't escape the impression that Mrs. Thatcher wanted a different Europe to the Europe we wanted. She responded to this remark with an observation alluding to the strained relationship between the two women. That will soon change if she is still around, the Queen is supposed to have said. So this gentleman is no longer alive. So of course, immediately we're questioning whether this was true. I would guess in the first instance that an ambassador would report correctly back to his own country. But let's remind ourselves that we appear to have a Queen Elizabeth working for the EU in the background. She's just forgotten to tell her people. And of course, it was the UK column we initially reported that the Queen's own staff were reporting that the Queen had accepted mediatisation under the European Union. That's essentially giving away your authority in order to keep the trappings of power and money. What is this, Mike? It would appear to be utter betrayal of the nation, if true.
I think we have been thinking along these lines for some time, but it's incredible how more information comes out along that seems to reinforce it. We come back, as the Independent had on their front page, they had the image of Queen Elizabeth at the opening of Parliament, of this session of Parliament, wearing the blue hat with the yellow flowers on it.
And no crown.
And no crown.
Yeah.
So I think that says it all, really. But anyway, in the meantime, of course, Theresa May was giving her speech yesterday for the fourth meaningless vote. This is going to take place apparently early June. Could it be around the same time that Donald Trump is visiting? We're not quite sure exactly what the date is going to be just yet. But yesterday she gave a little speech to sort of launch the whole thing. So let's have a look at a little bit of that just to give people a flavour of it.
So our new Brexit deal makes a 10-point offer to everyone in Parliament who wants to deliver the result of the referendum. 1, the government will seek to conclude alternative arrangements to replace the backstop by December 2020 so that it never needs to be used. 2, a commitment that should the backstop come into force, the government will ensure that Great Britain will stay aligned with Northern Ireland. 3, the negotiating objectives and final treaties for our future relationship with the EU will have to be approved by MPs. 4, a new workers' rights bill that guarantees workers' rights will be no less favourable than in the EU. 5, there will be no change in the level of environmental protection when we leave the EU. 6, the UK will seek as close to frictionless trade in goods with the EU as possible, while outside the single market and ending free movement. 7, we'll keep up to date with EU rules for goods and agri-food products that are relevant to checks at the border, protecting the thousands of jobs that depend on just-in-time supply chains. 8, the government will bring forward a customs compromise for MPs to decide on to break the deadlock. 9, there will be a vote for MPs on whether the deal should be subject to a referendum. And 10, there will be a legal duty to secure changes to the political declaration to reflect this new deal. All of these commitments will be guaranteed in law, so they will endure at least for this Parliament. The revised deal will deliver on the result of the referendum. And only by voting for the withdrawal agreement bill at second reading can MPs provide the vehicle Parliament needs to determine how we leave the EU. So if MPs vote against the second reading of this bill, they are voting to stop Brexit.
Was that a threat at the end? Or was it a prediction? Had she been looking at her crystal ball and is she saying this is the great way to stop Brexit, continue to obfuscate, create division within Parliament, we can never move this thing forward? Well, look, she's intending to bring this meaningless vote to Parliament in early June, before the end of session for the summer term. You know, they go on summer holiday and so on. Is this going to get to the point where it's such a serious thing that there's some kind of emergency session over the summer? I don't think so. But look, what did she say? The first two: replace the backstop by 2020 so that it doesn't need to be used. And then she said, but if it does need to be used, so what's she going to do? Is she going to replace the backstop so that it doesn't need to be used, or is it going to be used? It's totally...
It's orchestrated chaos, Mike.
Absolutely.
This is deliberate, it's planned, it's designed to deceive and confuse people. But of course, what's not happening is we're not leaving the European Union.
That is ultimately the situation.
And did she mention defence? I was sleeping during that address at one point. So Theresa May did not mention EU Defence Union. She does not mention that Britain has already been signed into that EU Defence Union. She does not mention that means that Britain's armed forces, Navy, Army, Air Force, nuclear weapons are all being placed under single point European control. But we can also tell our viewers and listeners today with quite some confidence that there's now fear in Westminster amongst anybody who speaks up on the subject of EU Defence Union.
Well, to such a degree, in fact, that anybody that's speaking up on it is being pulled into the whip's office, being given a dressing down, and being told, in fact, that they must not ask questions because the questions can't be answered due to the Official Secrets Act. So where does that leave people? So democracy is effectively stopped with respect to European Defence Union and Britain's potential to be in it because those questions can't be asked.
Yeah. So the Queen has been doing her bit in the background without bothering to tell the British people. We've now got the Conservatives under Theresa May, armed forces signed into EU Defence Union, but if any MP dares to ask a question, you're going to be threatened by one of the whips. And I can say we are very, very confident in making this report today, and we'd like to thank those at the London end who bring us this information.
So fear is the story of the day, and well, let's talk about this for a second, because of course this was Nigel Farage having a milkshake thrown over him in Newcastle. The headline on CBS News here: throwing milkshakes as a political statement makes a splash in Britain. Well, it made a splash on Twitter as well. So here's Harriet Sargent saying, "It doesn't matter if you're Brexit or Remain, right or left. if someone can throw a milkshake over a politician, then they can throw acid. I'd be terrified to be canvassing right now. So fear is the message of the day. And well, she was a bit prescient with this allusion to acid because somebody else, this lady, Ruth Townsley, at Vintage Cyclist on Twitter, tweeted this out. Bravo to Paul Crowther. Good on you, mate. Great that milkshakes have become a thing when it comes to the racists in our midst. I prefer acid, but milkshakes will do for now, I guess. Nigel Farage hit by milkshake during Newcastle walkabout. Well, as you would expect, this suggestion that perhaps acid would be a better option than milkshakes received quite a backlash. And Ruth Townsley, well, we'll come on to that in a second. Now, Ruth Townsley, at the time that she pushed this tweet out, was in her little blurb on Twitter advertising the fact that she works for this organisation, Happy City. So it's all about helping individuals, communities and cities to do more of what matters. It's all common purpose style.
Well, it's all happiness. I'm very happy to be seeing this on screen. I feel happy.
Yes, and so you should. So it's all about happiness, well-being, common purpose style. But clearly that doesn't apply to politics, where you shouldn't be happy. You should be throwing acid at MPs or at prospective candidates for the European election instead. Doesn't matter what you think of Nigel Farage. Well, look, Happy City is part of what Ruth Townsley is involved in. She, in her past, worked for this organisation, Locality. And so if anybody wants to understand really the type of mind that's at work here, have a look at this article on the UK Column website. It's on the front page at the moment, down in the lower section. Common Purpose in Your Locality by Martin Edwards. Do have a read at that to get an idea of what Ruth Townsley has been working at in the past and what might be going through her head. She eventually made an apology. I want to apologise unreservedly for my tweet yesterday. It was stupid, thoughtless, and posted in a moment of frustration. I do not in any way advocate the use of acid on anyone at all, ever, although that wasn't the implication of the tweet that she put out. I've apologised personally in writing to Nigel Farage. Well, she got criticised for this apology because many people felt that it was not sufficient and so on. So the question is, will Ruth Townsley be receiving a visit from the police over that tweet, as many others have been for significantly less?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is she still in a job? Well, we don't know the answers to those questions at the moment. But in the meantime, if we're talking about fear, we need to have a look at this. This is a letter pushed out to the heads of the political parties yesterday from the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And it's all about the idea that there is intimidation going on of people that are active in political circles. So the Committee on Standards in Public Life have now managed to get the Joe Cox Foundation to work with political parties on a joint approach to tackling intimidation in politics. So they have written, as I say, to the heads of the political parties in order to get them to work together to develop a joint code of conduct on intimidatory behaviour during election campaigns. It doesn't necessarily, at least I don't get the impression, that it matters too much about any intimidation that's going on outside of election campaigns, but they certainly want to deal with it at these times. So, as I say, the Joe Cox Foundation has agreed that they would act as independent support for this work.
Mike, I just happened to notice of that image that you had on screen that we've got the Right Honourable Brandon Lewis MP there. Now, I believe I'm correct in saying he was formerly Minister of Policing. Yes. And this was the man who received all of the information and the testimony about the cover-up of the abuse of children from former Met Detective John Wedger, and Mr. Brandon Lewis did nothing.
Indeed.
Interesting, but if there's intimidation during the elections, he's on board to sort that out.
Apparently.
Yeah, good. Well, let's come on to the subject of this immensely brave lady, Georgia Poulican. And I'd like to say thank you, a very big thank you to all the people in England who have helped to support this lady over the last few weeks. Georgia Poulican, trained at law in France. She's been blogging, producing nearly daily reports on French police brutality against yellow vests. But over the last couple of weeks, things have become so vicious, so dangerous in France. She's had to come out of France. And I'm just going to say the help and support that many people have given to make that possible has been really excellent. Now, why is this lady speaking out? Well, it's to do with the action of this gentleman, Macron. This is the tally at the moment of injuries as a result of his policies with the French police. 2,448 injuries, 24 people have lost eyes, 5 have lost hands. There have been 12,107 arrests, 10,718 people who've been in police custody, 1,954 convictions, and 313 people now in prison, most of those people in location unknown to their families and friends. This is the EU at its best. This is what we can expect if Britain stays in the EU. These injuries utterly horrific. And I'm going to say, if there's anybody weak disposition, you might want to turn away. I'm just going to show you two of the situations which Macron's vicious policies in France have unleashed on the French people. So we'll bring in this young lady. This is one of many people who've lost eyes as a result of being hit in the eye by the so-called baton round, the LBD. The French police, by law, should only be aiming at the bodies, torsos of people in the crowd. The weapon uses a laser sight, so if the red dot is on your head, that is where the round is going to go. And so these are deliberate shots at the head by French police, who are now being fully supported and protected by Macron. A beautiful young lady with massive injury to her eye as a result of this brutality by the French police. This is the weapon that they're using, the LBD-40. Many reports about how lethal it is, but at the moment no action being taken by the French government. And these are the sorts of weapons that are now being put into the arsenal of European police. And of course, under EU Defence Union, all police forces are fully integrated in this system. Now, we'd just like to point out here that the BBC has carried some reports about the injuries, no in-depth investigation into the scale along the lines that UK Column has just put up on screen. But of course, what did the BBC do in its article? Well, of course, it ended by reporting and reinforcing the French state line on what was happening. What did the French authorities say? Earlier this week, police made clear the riot gun would be used only where security forces faced violence or if they had no other means of defence. Only the torso and upper or lower limbs could be targeted. Interior Minister Laurent Nunez told the French Senate on Thursday that the use of force by the police was always proportionate and under very strict and controlled conditions. If the police hadn't used these means of defence, perhaps some of them would have been lynched, he said.
Perhaps.
The European Court of Human Rights rejected a temporary ban on flashballs last month in a case brought by several people who said they'd been hit by flashballs. So the BBC is so callous over this that all it does is dismisses these terrible injuries. We're only showing a fraction of what's really going on. BBC defending the French government and the appalling brutality against peaceful protesters and across a spectrum of French society, young, old, infirm. This is probably the worst. This is an elderly lady in Nice. She got caught up in gas. She ended up falling, hitting her head on the pavement. She died because the police prevented medical staff from going to her aid. And one of the things I'd like to say at this point is that the French lady who's spoken out, Georgia Pouliquin, was herself a member of the gendarmes, so she's trained at law, she's been within the gendarmerie, She is utterly appalled at the viciousness and brutality of these police, fully backed by the European Union's policy under Macron. Well, here's the man, and I'm going to thank the person who sent me this email. It basically says that instructions from the Ministry of Justice in France are saying that that preferably the authorities should maintain registration databases in police records of people even when the facts haven't been established or are tenuous. So here's the French state. There's no evidence against you.
Presumption of guilt.
It's a presumption of guilt, and you are going to be held on a police database forever because there's hearsay or equivalent non-evidence against you. So this is the state of justice within the European Union, and of course it's the European Union that Theresa May is desperate to keep the British public involved with. So a picture here of the style of policing, which is fully supported by Macron. Remember that this man was elected as a left-wing liberal, but his first policies were to bring into post a right-wing prime minister and to instigate tax benefits for global companies and the hedge funds. So this is the question: why should we British care about police brutality in France? We think this is the key thing, because under EU Defence Union, all police are part of the state's unified military, paramilitary system for the police under single point control of the EU, and Federica Mogherini will be the person in control of those police assets. And of course the police can be moved between states so that communities are not being policed by their own state, by their own policemen. And Theresa May and Conservatives have already signed the UK into this EU Defence Union. And as you've just said, Mike, if any MP dares to mention the subject, they're being taken into whips offices to be blackmailed or threatened. It's hard to know, but certainly threatened. Well, we'd like to say that we've just completed an interview and documentary with Georgia Poulican, talking about the horrors that are unfolding in France at the moment. This will be out in the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that documentary. And we'd like to say that this lady is now dependent on the help of people in Britain at the moment. So if you feel that you can give her some financial support, she needs it, and I will say she deserves it for taking the risk to bring the truth of what's happening in France to our eyes in England. I've learnt a lot in this subject, Mike, and I have to say that this lady has been immensely brave.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we can't get this type of information out unless there's a free press, and that includes for the likes of us, but that's increasingly being shut down. So here we have NewsGuard. NewsGuard is speaking to all of Britain's internet service providers at the moment about the ability to intercept people's browsing habits and send alerts to warn people that are using the internet if they're visiting sites that are suspect as they define the word. So they're going to be automatically warned through their ISP if they're visiting an untrustworthy news website. And this is part of a deal that NewsGuard is trying to implement at the moment. Now, the service already has a plugin if you want to volunteer for this. For all the major browsers, you can see that there's a Firefox Get NewsGuard button on screen at the moment. And what fascinated me about it when I had a look at this morning, that it requires permission to access your data for all websites, and it requires permission to access all your browser tabs. So they're not asking for much, and I really would like to know what data they're collecting, aside from the fact that they are deciding to label sites and put, well, we'll have a look at what they're doing with sites in a second. So here, for example, is what they say about RT. If you go looking for RT, they say proceed with caution. The website severely violates basic standards of credibility and transparency. And so they say that RT does not, they say that RT basically repeatedly publishes false content, that it gathers and presents information irresponsibly, that it handles the difference between news and opinion irresponsibly, and that it uses deceptive headlines. They give RT a couple of ticks. So they say that they regularly correct or clarify errors, and they say that they clearly label advertising, and they say that they reveal who's in charge, including any possible conflicts of interest. But they say that the site does not provide the names of content creators along with either contact or biographical information. Well, in fact, for many of the opinion pieces that they commission from people, they do absolutely say who has published or who has written that content. But of course, for the day-to-day sort of news articles, they don't. But that applies equally to many other news websites. So let's have a look and see what they say about the Daily Mail. They say that it does maintain basic standards of credibility and transparency, and therefore it gets a massive green tick. But this is a recent development, Brian, because The Guardian actually highlighted that Mail Online had been given an untrustworthy rating by NewsGuard. And so the Daily Mail started running a massive campaign against NewsGuard. And then suddenly NewsGuard changed their opinion of the Daily Mail. That's...
Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
My question here is that obviously I knew NewsGuard was coming into force. Who are the people behind NewsGuard?
We'll come on to that in a second. Right, let's just have a quick look at what they say about the BBC. Well, of course it gets a big tick. It gets ticks right across the board, except for they do acknowledge that the BBC doesn't give the names of its content creators. And of course, we've mentioned this before on the programme. So who's behind NewsGuard? Well, here's their advisory board. They've got Don Baer, the chairman of Burson, Kuhn and Wolf, former White House communications director. They've got the founding editor of Wired. They've got General Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA.
Excellent. Sorry, I apologise for laughing at that.
Yes, Elise Jordan, political analyst at NBC. They've got Jessica Lessett, founder and editor-chief of The Information. They've got Anders Fogh Rasmussen, former Prime Minister of Denmark, former Secretary General of NATO, founder of the Alliance of Democracies Foundation. We've got Tom Ridge, the first Secretary of Homeland Security under George W. Bush. Richard Sambrook, Director of the Centre of Journalism at Cardiff University, former Director of Global News for the BBC.
Is that a conflict of interest, surely?
You couldn't say that, surely. Richard Stengel, former editor of Time magazine and Under Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy under President Obama. And Jimmy Wales, co-founder of Wikimedia. So there you go, nothing to worry about. Now, we've just go back to just take one example. Here's Anders Fogh Rasmussen, of course, founder of the Alliance of Democracies Foundation, which is mentioned there, funded by Microsoft, Facebook, BMW, the National Democrat, the Atlantic Council. So it's all in there. It's all in there, but we don't have to worry because this is going to be enabled automatically through some kind of filtering at your ISP. And you will automatically be alerted that if you come to the UK column and others that we are dodgy. And so you can rest assured that if you go to the BBC, that's probably the best thing for you.
Yes. Well, a few people have commented, is this a joke? And we have to say, no, it's not a joke. This is part of now living in the emerging dictatorship under Theresa May's Conservative government, where, of course, free speech must be banned because it's dangerous to policy. Well, let's have a look at how that banning of free speech works. And again, we have had a lot of viewers tell us about what's been happening in Birmingham. I've chosen to go with the BBC to influence, of course, the bias reporting. LGBT lessons row, more Birmingham schools stop classes. So if you read the BBC's report on this, it spins this as Muslim parents protesting at the sexualisation of young children and is saying that really they're homophobic. What it fails to mention is that local Christian parents are fully supportive of the concerns. So we have something very, very interesting starting to happen in Birmingham, that both Muslim and Christian parents are unhappy at what they consider to be the blatant sexualisation of very young children, in the sex education program. They say it's totally inappropriate. But the BBC is trying to just pin this as concerns from the Muslim community. Now I can say that we're in touch with both sides who are actually protesting about what is going on inside the schools. I'll just put up on screen what Ofsted said. Ofsted has deemed the sex lessons as age appropriate. So there's the BBC getting in the official line and spinning the story that it's all Muslims. Here's ITV following the same routine. Hundreds of Muslim students kept home from school that teaches LGBT equality. This is not what the parents are protesting about. The parents are protesting about graphic sex education, which is, they say, over-sexualizing and destroying the minds of very young children. But Christian families are joining forces with the Muslim families to say we are not happy at what's going on in the schools. Now let's have a look at how this translates, because there's some video clips been reported. Here's the Independent, and here we've got some members of the Muslim community tackling local MP, that is Labour MP Jess Phillips. So very politely, the man says, "How come you've not supported the 300 parents who have been protesting?" And this originally affected one school, then it spread to 2 schools. Now there's more than 4. I'll bring details in further news programs. What was her reply? She says, "I don't agree that you get to pick and choose which equality you can and can't have. So you're a parent, you believe that what your child is told is wrong." So let's have a look at this. In this statement, she said, "I'm afraid our equality laws protect us all." And I think this is one of the most dangerous statements, because what she really means is the state owns your children and their minds, and parents have no right and no equality, because it does not matter what the parent says. The state, in particular Miss Jess Phillips and her colleagues, are going to tell you what they are going to put in the minds of your children. So I think this is utterly brilliant that we've now got both Christian and Muslim communities coming together to say, no, this isn't right. But we can see where the state censorship is going to go, because if we weren't able to produce the facts as to what's really happening on the ground, we'd simply be left with the BBC, ITV, an independent spin. And if you'd like to pick up more on this, I'm taking these at face value. I have done a little bit of research, but please check the organisations yourself. But this is one of many, this one's Schoolgate campaign, where parents are being urged to look at what sex education their children are receiving, whether it's appropriate or damaging, and if so, to get them to take action outside the school gates. So there's some very good handouts now been produced, and I also put this one up because we've got some meetings starting to take place. This one, gender confusion in the family. You'll have to do a bit of, I'm sorry, I haven't put up some details on that, but I think you'll find it through Christian Concern. There's another meeting taking place this Saturday at 11 o'clock in Birmingham, outside the Birmingham Rotunda, B5 4BU, corner of New Street and High Street, where families of both Muslim and Christian persuasion are coming together in order to protest the government's over-sexualisation of young children. I think this is really encouraging, Mike, because of course what does the state want to do? It wants to separate people so that it can get its agenda in.
Okay, so just a quick reminder, if you'd like to support what we do, please head over to the community website. That's ukcolumn.org/community, where you can take out a membership or subscription. It would be very much appreciated, because as Brian says, we can only do what we do with your help.
Okay, and we just a big thank you. We always like it where we get viewers and listeners who email with what they see and what they've observed. I'll read this very quickly. Hello, Brian. On holiday this week in Cornwall. So heartened to hear about Melanie, that we're back in contact. I've not written letters as they were not getting through, but I try to pray every day she'll receive loving and appropriate care. I've watched BBC interviews this week, Andrew Marr with Nigel Farage, Andrew Neil with Gerald Batten, and Ben Shapiro, Victoria Derbyshire with Carl Benjamin. What I noticed with all the BBC interviewers was that they all used the interviews as hit pieces to, quote, destroy their guests. They were set up. Neil was by far the most accomplished, but he is now exposed as a hack and not the independent he likes to parade himself as. You might like to look at Nick Cohen, writing in The Spectator about people in the Brexit Party. Apparently some are unreconstructed communists, former members of the Revolutionary Communist Party. This includes Claire Fox, who I've appreciated when she reviews the paper. Presumably, I think that means missed the background. So this is brilliant to see because, of course, hundreds of thousands of people researching the topics we're highlighting produces a very powerful media.
Just before we move on, just to let everybody know that AV10 DVDs are now available for pre-order if anybody wants to get a set. 16 DVDs this time round. They're available on the UK Column shop. The URL is there. Now those will not be shipping until the 1st of July because they're still being produced at the moment, but they are available for pre-order, and as usual there is a discount while they're in pre-order, so do get your orders in if you want to support Ian. And
we should also alert people to the fact that Ian Crane has released 2 videos straight away. One on David Noakes and Lynn, and of course that is about the cancer cover-up, and the other one was Georgia Pulicar. So there is information started to come out, which is very, very important.
Okay, good news, Brian, and thanks to our friends at the Cyprus Mail for this headline. RAF's Lightning planes land in Akrotiri for exercise. So several F-35B Lightning aircraft from 617 Squadron. Now, if anybody is historically minded, that's the Dambuster Squadron, which no longer has Lancasters, but has the F-35 instead. What an improvement. So they have flown from their base at RAF Marham in Norfolk to spend 6 weeks at RAF Akrotiri as part of Exercise Lightning Dawn. So I'm sure eagle-eyed people will understand the significance of that name. But anyway, so owned and operated by the RAF, the Ministry of Defence says. The Lightning Force is jointly manned by both the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy. This training exercise will allow personnel from both services to gain vital experience in maintaining and flying the aircraft in an unfamiliar environment. I'm fascinated that they chose the word maintaining before the word flying. I suspect that we are getting a little bit of a message there because probably quite a lot of maintenance is going to be required on these. Here is Group Captain Ian Townsend, who said it's just over 76 years since 617 Squadron formed to conduct groundbreaking operations. They're once again called upon to take a capability forwards for the first time. So I'm sure we all feel extremely proud.
Not particularly, no, Mike. I'm not particularly proud of this aircraft, and I don't think the nation will be shortly. We're also following through on the story of the removal of Queen Elizabeth, our famous aircraft carrier captain. Clearly he's said something which he shouldn't have, so he's had problems with his official car pinned against him, but that seems to be a little bit elastic now. I know a number of people have said what's happening. We'll try and do some research into that. But could it be that he said that the F-35 doesn't quite work as well as it was sold?
It's a turkey.
It's a turkey.
Mm. Right. Now, on Monday, Patrick Henningsen mentioned the OPCW leak. This is published through the Working Group on Syria, Media and Propaganda. This is Paul McKeague, David Miller and Dr. Piers Robinson. And if you have a look on their website, what you need to look for is assessment by the engineering sub-team of the OPCW fact-finding mission investigating the alleged chemical attack in Douma in April 2018. And of course, what was coming out of that was a leaked document from the OPCW which was not included in the final report, and the questions are, why was it not included in the final report? And as we pointed out on Monday, the only mainstream British mainstream outlet to publish anything on this was the Mail through Peter Hitchens' blog. In other words, Peter Hitchens published this. It didn't go through the normal editorial process. And he said this: the document written by one of the OPCW's most experienced investigators shows that it is highly unlikely that gas canisters found at the scene of an alleged poison gas attack in Douma, Syria, were actually dropped from helicopters, as been widely believed and claimed. The claim is crucial to the case for bombing Syria. Well, Vanessa has now, she's in Syria at the moment, has now discovered something interesting relating to this. And so she tweeted this out yesterday. Major puzzle in FFM Douma report. This is the OPCW report. The team leader apparently left Damascus on the 17th of April 2018, checked out of hotel 3 days after arrival, and reliable sources confirmed his identity, and that he later then met with white helmets in Turkey, and Vanessa quite rightly saying explanations are required. And then she followed it up to ask, why did the team leader quit Douma investigation in Damascus and head to Turkey to meet with UK intelligence incubated white helmets before completion of the investigation in Douma? To what extent is the OPCW compromised and biased? I think these are very good questions. It seems that the OPCW is completely compromised at this point. You know, the White Helmets were the group that produced the video in the first place. They are, as Vanessa says, have been UK intelligence incubated and supported and UK funded to a large degree. So what was the OPCW up to here? This is the question.
Obfuscating the truth, I think, is the minimum. But of course, that report is key, isn't it? Because the bombing took place as a result of these claims.
Absolutely.
We've had weapons of mass destruction and the lies around Iraq. We've got the same pattern now with Syria. And of course, we know the British government is lying to its own people over Brexit. So we're in a very dangerous post-truth age. What can we do about it? It requires many, many people to stand up and be counted and to challenge. We'll end there. I've already had a request for information about how people can support the French lady Georgia Poulican, and basically she can be emailed at georgia.poulican@gmail.com.
Now we'll put that up on screen for people.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And I will get details of how people can make a donation to her in due course.
Now, I regret to say that we are going to be taking another day off from the news on Friday. We're getting the team together over the next couple of days to do some planning for what we do for the rest of the year. And unfortunately, the way that flights worked for one or two people, that means that we aren't able to produce a programme on Friday. So there'll be no UK column news on Friday. We will be back at the usual time, 1 p.m. on Monday.
That's it. Thanks very much for joining us. And if you're not a subscriber of UK Column, please consider subscribing and or making a donation. We can only do what we do with your financial support. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.